So in a lot of applications, you need the ability to send a notification from your web app to somebody's email or text or push notification. And you can think of that being applicable to a lot of applications that you use day to day, such as delivery applications, where you place an order and then all of a sudden you have a text message on your phone letting you know that your order is on the way. Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive in today through the power of React, AWS Amplify, and a little bit of SNS. We're going to see just how easy we can combine those to create a full stack application that gives us the ability to mimic a portion of a catering app. So if that sounds good to you, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so before we dive into the code, I'm actually going to take a brief moment to talk about the architecture that we're dealing with here. And it's actually pretty simple, right? We have a catering driver. They're going to go ahead and log in through a web application, hit up some API endpoint. This is going to be through the use of API Gateway and AWS Lambda. And that Lambda is going to be in charge of talking to Amazon SNS, which is obviously going to send the event on over to the customer via a text message. Now you can see that there's this square here, and this is going to encompass 3 different services that Amplify is going to generate for us. And then we're really just going to talk about SNS because even though it isn't included in the Amplify CLI, we can tie in with any of the services through the use of a Lambda function. So that's just a little bit of overview on how the architecture is going to be structured. So let's go ahead and dive into the code. Now I already have a sample repo set up for us that you can go ahead and download. I'll put the link in the description. But we're going to say git clone and then paste in that repo here is catering SNS example. Now this is scaffolded with create next app, but we can go ahead and use this for our purposes and take a peek and see what's generated for us. So I'm going to open this up in my editor. Awesome. And now that I have this opened in VS Code, let's take a peek at what the code looks like. And then also I might as well get the app running so we can take a peek at what it looks like in the browser. So npm run dev. Whoops, I should probably do install first. And let's hop over to the app.js. You see it's just your standard create next app. I do have some commented out code that we'll look at later on, but let's move over to the index.js file. Now within here, you can see that we have some static orders here. An order is going to have an ID, a list of products, and then some notes from a customer. You can imagine, customers leave notes on their applications. And then the status, awaiting pickup. And we can imagine that that would change to something like in progress or, en route, something of that nature. So we have our customer notes here. And then I have some more commented out code, which is going to actually make the API call once we get there. And then from here, it really is just some basic HTML to make things look nice. So let's take a peek and see what this looks like in the browser. npm run dev on localhost 3000. And this should open everything up for us in just a moment. There we go. So I have my current catering orders. We see those static elements being pulled in right here. We have 2 of them. 1 and 2, and they're both awaiting pickup. Now what I want is that when I click on one of these, it fires off an API call. It gives the driver back the address so that way they can navigate to where they need to go. And then the customer is now informed that an order is on the way. So let's take a peek and see how we can accomplish this with Amplify. I'm going to, let's kill the application. And I'll prop this open just a little bit more so we have some real estate. We're going to be in here for just a little bit. The first thing on our architecture guide is that we wanted to add in authentication. So let's first initialize Amplify in this project and do just that. I'm going to say Amplify init. And keep in mind that this is a NextJS application. So the defaults aren't going to work because we want them to be for NextJS, and by default, therefore create React app. So I'm going to say no. And then dev works, VS Code is what we're in. It's JavaScript, React, that's fine. But when we get to the source directory path, I'm going to say dot to work in the root directory. and then .next is what Next.js is going to provide for us. So we got that set up. Everything else pretty much stays the same. And I'm going to select my AWS profile once that gives me the option to do just that. There it is. And I'll stick with the default here. All right, that went ahead and got done setting up our backend, getting everything initialized in the cloud. So let's begin adding those categories. I'm going to stick with Amplify add auth for now. And we don't need to get too fancy with this. So I'm just going to accept the default configuration that it asks for. It gives me sensible defaults like a password policy that makes sense. Usernames are fine. And then we're not going to configure any advanced settings. So that's perfectly okay to say, no, I'm done. Awesome. Once that gets set up, we can actually begin adding our API. So Amplify add API is all I need to type. And it's going to walk me through that same series of prompts. Now I have two types of APIs to work in. I have GraphQL and I have REST. I'm going to select REST for this example. It's actually really important that I do provide a friendly name here. So I'm going to say something like delivery API. The path will be /status. And then when it asks me if I want to create a function to tie in with this API, yes, I do. And we can say delivery func. Node.js is what I'm working in. It's just going to be a regular hello world function here. And we don't need to configure any advanced settings just yet, but we're actually going to take a peek at this in just a moment. But I do want to edit it now, and it's going to create this function template for me. So that way I don't have to worry about getting too much set up here. So if you notice, the prompts aren't done, right? There's still more to work on here, but I'm going to slide this over for the time being. And that gives us the opportunity to just focus on this right here. Now, the nice thing about this application is that I already have a blog post showcasing how you can go through all these steps with me. And the cool thing is you don't have to see me struggle to type in all of the code for this Lambda function. In fact, I'm actually just going to copy and paste it right in here. Now, it's only, 45 lines of code? So nothing too bad, nothing too scary here. But let's take a moment to walk through and get familiar with what's happening. And if you wanted some more detail, definitely check out the blog post. But let's go ahead and dive in here. First and foremost, we're going to bring in the AWS SDK. Now we don't have to install this because this is a Lambda function. When it runs on AWS, this part is already installed. And we're going to use that to say, hey, we want to configure SNS. Now, if you're not familiar with SNS, again, it gives you the ability to send those emails, push notifications, really just general messages out from one subscriber, from one publisher to many subscribers. And that's perfect for our use case. Now, in this application, we're mimicking that someone is going to give us an order ID. All right, so we're going to go ahead and grab that from the function's body by first parsing it as JSON and then grabbing the .order ID. And this is really just sort of a fake database that we have set up. So over in step 2, we can say, hey, go ahead and using the order ID, grab the item from that fake database. And we're basically going to use that to publish to SNS. And we do it with these lines right here. So I can say, hey, SNS, go ahead and publish this message. And it's like, well, where do you want to publish it? I'm like, well, I want to publish it to this SNS topic, which is just an instance of SNS over on AWS. It's like, all right, cool. Well, just to let you know, when I publish this message over to this instance of SNS, this topic, it's going to go out to every single subscriber, which isn't what we want, right? We just want it to go out to the specific delivery person. Well, in that case, or the customer rather. Well, in that case, we can say, well, here are some attributes that I want you to work with here. I'm going to pass you an object that has a key of SMS, and inside of it, I'm just going to give you some additional information like, hey, heads up, it's going to be a string array, which is why I have this array here that's stringified. And the value is going to be this order.phone number, which if you recall above, we have order.phone number right here with Mike Jones's phone number. So given that information, all of this is going to be sent over to SNS. And we can tell on the subscriber level, who needs to pay attention to this. Because if anyone has these attributes, then that means that they care about it. The message is able to be filtered. And we'll see a little bit more of that in just a moment. But moving on from here, we're just going to accept cores. So we're going to set the headers, and then we're going to return back to the front-end application the address. That way the delivery driver can get on their way. So let's go ahead and save this. We're going to hit enter here, back over in the terminal. And it's like, cool. Well, do you want to restrict API access to this function? Yes, we do. We only want authenticated users to make a put request. So we'll hit update there. Do you want to add another path? No, we don't. Perfect. So we have that set up. I'm going to clear that out for just a moment. And if you notice, we have that whole process.env for the topic ARN. The thing to note is that we haven't created this SNS topic just yet. So let's change that. I'm going to head over to the console. Here. And now that I'm in my console, I'm going to bump this up just a little bit so you can see it and head over to SNS. You can also just type SNS right from the top here and it'll take you there. Now that we're here, we're going to go ahead and create a brand new topic. So I'll say create topic right here. We're going to select standard and we'll call this catering example. Awesome. Now all of these other fields we can go ahead and leave just fine alone. So now that we have the topic created, keep in mind that this ARN is going to be pretty important because we need to tell our Lambda function that that's the one that we care about. And then in addition to that, we also want to assign subscribers to this topic. So I'm going to say create subscription right here. The protocol is going to be SMS. And then here, I'm going to put in a phone number that I want to subscribe here. Now this is twofold, okay? You want to go ahead and put in a valid phone number. And that's all in good there, but you also want to make sure that you have what's known as an origination number. Now to create an origination number, you just want to click on this top little banner piece right here, and I'll include a link in the description in case that banner isn't there and you just want a direct link to it. But from here, the steps are pretty simple. You just want to make sure you have that origination number. So I'm going to select the SNS topic that we just created. There it is, and then I'm going to select the protocol. Now we're working with SMS, and then here I'm just going to type in any phone number. Now keep in mind, the phone number that we have in our Lambda function should correspond to the phone number that we have here, right? We're tying the two together. So let's say we have 1, so +1, and then we'll just give it a bunch of 5s, right? 555, 555, and then 4 more. Great. Now keep in mind, once we subscribe this, they're going to receive every single message that comes through, which is definitely not what we want. So I'm going to apply a filter policy. This filter policy comes into play by saying SMS, and then we're going to give it a string array. So I'm going to say here's an array, and then I'm going to put in the phone number right here. So again, it would be something like +1, and then the same number that we had above. Now notice in our front-end application, we said it's a string array, but here we are having an actual array with a string in it. Just a little bit of nuance that you have to work with there, but hopefully this video will not trip you up so that way you can get past that. Whoops, what am I missing here? I think I know what it is. The SMS right up here, I believe that should be in quotes. So let's go ahead and try this, create subscription. And yeah, that's all it is. Perfect. So I have the ARN. And again, we're not looking for this one. This is the ARN of the subscriber. Okay. We're looking for the one for the actual topic, which is going to be this one right here. So that's what we need. Go ahead and copy that into your application. I'm going to go ahead and change this to be my actual phone number, and then I'll catch you back in the code. All right, so now that we're here back in VS Code, let's go ahead and update our Lambda function. That way it has the ability to accept the environment variable. So I'm going to run amplify update function. And this is going to go ahead and bring up the prompts that we're pretty familiar with at this point. So let's say we have an environment variable that we want to go ahead and configure. The name, I should probably make them the same, right? SNS topic arn, snake case as topic arn. And it's like, what's the value that we're working with here? And it's just going to be that ARN that we had before. So I'm going to hit enter there, and I'm pretty much done from this aspect. And I don't want to edit the function now. It's already updated. So we have that in place, but there's one more thing, and this is just, if you work with AWS for a while, you know where we're going, is that we have to give our Lambda the ability to actually make this API call, right? Everything's super secure. Now, the cool thing is that IAM policies just got an update when it comes to Lambda functions. So before, we had to hop into the CloudFormation template and do a lot of fun stuff that way. But now it's actually a lot simpler. We have this custom policies.json file that got created for us. And I can just as easily come in here and say, hey, here's the SNS publish command that I want this Lambda to have access to. And here's the topic that I want it to be able to have access to as well. Whoops. There we go. And just by having this, it's automatically going to be merged into the CloudFormation template for us. We don't have to worry about that anymore. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop back into our terminal. We're going to say amplify push. This is going to check the resources that we created. Sure enough, we have an API, a function, and then we have Cognito set up through authentication. All these are created right here. Are we sure we want to continue? Yes, I am. And it's going to publish those up to the cloud for us. Now that's great, but let's go ahead and configure our front end so that way it can actually communicate with our back end. So I'm going to get rid of this file, and over in, let's begin with underscore app.js. Now I made this, tried to make it as easy as possible for us, where we just have to uncomment a bunch of stuff. So here's Amplify, we're bringing it in, we're setting up the config. And now if we head over to the index.js in our pages directory, we have a couple of things that we want to uncomment here. We have the API, we have with Authenticator. We're going to be making a call to an API, so that's why we have to bring in that module. And then down here, we'll uncomment this. And this is pretty much where the magic happens, right? We have our delivery API. This is that friendly name that we gave our API. And we decided to call the endpoint /status. So we have that here as well. Now, scrolling down a little bit, we have the event handler actually being attached on this onClick. So we'll uncomment that. And I believe the last one is going to be right here, where we will comment out the normal export default, and then we will uncomment this with Authenticator. And this is all we need to have that full authenticated experience where users can sign up, sign in, do forgot password, etc. Now, in an actual application, you probably wouldn't want anybody to just have the ability to sign up. But again, this is just to demonstrate the value of SNS. So let's check on our API, see how that's doing. All right, now that we've got everything updated, let's go ahead and clear this out. We'll run our application one more time, and we should see a completely different front page here. Looks like I got a quick little error. We can't, let's see here, resolve Amplify. Silly me, I didn't import those dependencies, so let's go ahead and do that real quick. I'm going to say npm I. We have both AWS Amplify to bring in, and then also the components that we have as well. And that's going to be from the UI-React library. We'll go ahead and install both of those, and then we'll run it one more time. All right, so we have this set up. Let's go ahead and create an account. I'm going to create one behind the scenes, and then I'll catch you as soon as we're over in the application. So if I go ahead and click on a product item, let's see what happens here. Perfect. And then over in the console, you can see that I did get the address. Now the question is, did I get the text? And the answer is yes. I'm going to go ahead and bring this over to a new screen so you can see it here. There we go. I just had to bring it here so that way I can block out this phone number area that you all can't see there. And you can see, yes, sure enough, I have a bunch of test messages from when I was working on this. And then this is the latest one here saying your order is out for delivery. All right, so just like that, you saw just how easy it can be to leverage the power of React, Amplify, and even bring in some services that Amplify doesn't support, like SMS. So that way you can deliver real-time notifications to your users by reaching outside of your web app and jumping into their text messaging inbox. Pretty cool stuff. This is actually a pre-note into a blog series that I have coming out where we're going to be creating a real world production grade catering application. It's going to be super exciting. There's a lot of different components to it. I look forward to sharing it with you all. But if you want to stay tuned for details, definitely feel free to go ahead and like, subscribe, follow me on this journey, share the content so that way others can be notified of it. But aside from all that, I'll catch you next time. Peace.